What's up, everybody? Today I'm excited to connect with Bob the Baptist of the YouTube channel Brave New Tube here in the Yours Truly virtual studio. As things happen around here in this little corner of the internet, you bump into people from the algorithm, you watch their video, you go follow them on X, you see them, you follow some of their tweets, you go watch some more videos, and before you know it, you don't really know how you kind of found this person or what exactly was interesting. You just found the person interesting. Well, such is the case with Bob the Baptist from Brave New Tube. His videos are emblematic in that the way that they are unironically post-ironic sincerity. He covers culture, Christianity, and from a confessionally Baptist perspective, he's funny, he's silly, but he's serious and real. He leaves each video with the mimetic quip, "Stay Baptist, my friends." He has an intentional style you might recognize as a mix between the trippiness of McMosif, the wittiness and strong opinions of Graham Grizz, strong theological and cultural outlook of a PBK, and some slick production sensibility, more like myself. I reached out to Bob a while back. We did an introductory phone call, then got a date on the calendar. Bob said he was interested in discussing Metamodernism. I was interested in hearing more about his story, how he came to making these videos, and kind of the metagelical conversation that he has found himself speaking to. So on that note, don't forget to like and subscribe for the algo, subscribe for the vanity metrics, and if you want to help support this channel financially, become a channel member. There's a link down in the description. This is going to be good, so let's just get into it. So without any further delay, I give you Bob the Baptist of Brave New Tube.
Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud.
Rolling. So yeah, man, we're going here. Bob the Baptist. Welcome to the Yours Truly podcast. And I don't know, one of the things we kind of, I'm in this kind of digital subculture. You know, these things they continue to kind of evolve online, different kind of tribes or whatever people say about that stuff. But I don't know. Let's get started with a little bit about what has made Bob the Baptist. I found that a good way to do that is to simply ask this magical question called just tell me about the house you grew up in, or tell me about the home you grew up in. We'll start there.
What? Are you serious?
Yeah.
Wow. That's like, so I was kind of running down some things because some of the story is a little bit chaotic and crazy. And as we've gotten into online life, I've had to bounce this question around in my mind a couple times. Like, how much do I really want to say out there? And you're an example of this, but like maybe one way to fight, we can get into this too. Maybe one way to fight some of the issues in our culture that we're experiencing is authenticity. It's been an idea that I've been tossing around, but I kind of got that from watching some of your stuff. I was like, I feel like, and it's not about being authentic per se, but like honest. And so it's just funny that you're asking that because my backstory can get a little wild. So I'm going to try to be appropriate, but honest.
Yeah, man.
So I'll keep it at this. One of my parents, well, I'll just say, because she's part of the story later, she dies. She had serious disorders, and I'll just keep it at that. And so that coupled with, I think you see a lot of times people with mental disorders, they'll personality. Sometimes they can get caught up into the charismatic scene. And my mom grew up Baptist, but then she got into we grew up in some pretty culty places. Oh, by the way, it's like raining cats and dogs right now.
Sounds good on my end. The AI's got our back on that.
And if the electricity goes out, just my bad.
Okay.
But yeah, we grew up in some pretty culty pockets of Christianity. And eventually we landed in a decent non-denominational church. And that was where I spent most of my time. But there was a lot of emotional, spiritual, and some kinds of abuse that went on. And yeah, what else do you want to know about that? Having said that, I'm trying to
Well,
stay.
I mean, that I probably, share some of that with you. Like that sounds familiar, in a certain way. And, grew up charismatic, and we were Baptist until I was about 5. And then we spent the next 5 till about junior high, 7th grade or so, 13. It was kind of back and forth a little bit. I did like 2 years of Baptist, but the rest of it was charismatic. And, I think that world does tend to lean, not that all these other worlds in certain ways have had, they were the first ones to be built on charisma, like in a broad sense. And so you have that happening in these little pockets, right? These little churches with just this, and that happened in other denominations, but it was kind of more controlled by the institutions. And so it wasn't as, but now, you can find it everywhere. So
yeah. The reason that's important to me is because the environment that I grew up in, I grew up with a parent that wanted a lot of control. And I just think of this, this red chair I spent a lot of time in, having my rights read to me. And so there was like this sense of like kind of, there's nothing wrong with being strict. So, but I just mean strict, just tight. I mean, I guess you could say all law, no gospel, but there was just like a lot of judgment. And then for whatever reason, I really cared about, I don't know why, because I knew other people that grew up in the charismatic church, and they, they lived very licentious lives. But I knew when I'd go to the camp and say the prayer and come back and say I want to live as a Christian, and then not like actually live that out, I felt guilty about that. And I did that year after year after year until I was 16. And I said, okay, Lord, this is your last chance, or my last chance. And I went and bought a little pocket-sized Bible to carry with me in my backpack, so that when I went back to school that year, I wouldn't cuss. And the Lord saved me. And that's kind of, that's such an interesting question to ask. Tell me about your home. But that, for some reason, it was like felt straitjacketed by this, demand to be holy. And I kept feeling like I wasn't able to do it. And then when Romans was explained to me, I literally thought, whether or not I had heard the hymn before, Jesus paid it all to him I owe. And so we can come back to that actually too, because that, looking back on that later in my Christian life, I came to really appreciate that little small town Southern Baptist church, and how the Lord used like this innocuous place to not let the light of his truth go out. And I'm just some kid that passes in its doors one day and finds, the Lord finds me, but basically brings me out of this state. And I was in the charismatic church for a couple of years after that, but very soon after my conversion was felt freed from an expression of faith that was very performative.
Well, and it's not just the charismatic, like you were kind of saying, that to me really is the spirit of fundamentalism that kind of pervades every stream of Christianity. You can find that anywhere. And I mean, I wrestled with those same things. I was 4 and I told my dad I was professed. He was leading a campfire devotional. It's like, Dad, I don't even know what I said, but I told him I wanted to be a Christian or something. And then I got baptized when I was 7. And this is a whole nother conversation about soteriology. We don't have to really get into, but I was basing this massive existential question on a decision that I think I maybe said when I was 4, right? And then I become a teenager, and it just is like, I go to a church camp and I have like a serious experience where I want, I feel like, okay, now that my faith is real, I don't know about what happened when I was 4 and I got baptized when I was 7. I don't know about all that. So
Dude, somebody needs to do a deep dive into like the psychology at a mass scale of that generation of youth and the impact that like camps had on us.
Yeah, and I have actually some thoughts because I've really thought about associationalism recently in related to some of the it was kind of in parallel with some of the stuff I watched from you, but in this week I want to talk about some authority stuff too. But what your point right there, the interesting thing that you said was do a psychology thing, and in my wide shot, there's this. I can't easily do it pop on the little menu here, but in the wide shot here, there's old Papa Peterson up there in the corner. He's vaguely, a saint but the thing about that is he's a psychologist, and a psychologist did hit all these people that were in that generation that you were talking about, and really people that were Christians, people that had deconstructed, people really, there was a psychological component that he spoke directly into. And I do think it has something to do with a little bit about what we're talking about. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Oh, so I thought this way you're talking. Psychology comes from the words, I think I'm getting this right. It's either psychos, or psychikon, but it was one of these Greek words. It's the
Psyche.
The study of the soul.
Yes.
And postmodernism took the soul, the man, and just ripped him apart, bifurcated all these parts, so that now when you go to study psychology, you're just studying data and the scientific side of it, but you're not talking about the soul. And then you have biblical counseling, which I actually love, what I would call pastoral counseling. But I feel like what we're doing is we have so many different disciplines that are just separated out. So now it's we need a good clinical psychologist, we need a good pastor, because the clinical psychologist hates God, or a lot of them do, but then the pastor is going to be, you could talk about alcoholism, or you could talk about drunkenness. They're both true terms, but one's a medical term or scientific term, and the other one has to do with sin. And
that's great.
How they describe it. But yeah, when you talk about psychology, we're talking about the experience of people, sense experience, or the experience. And then, you go to this place, it's secluded, you're away from society, as it were. And they dim the lights, they start playing the music, and it does
it's
something.
Not just that. It's not just that, because I worked church camp for a decade. I worked for a large Southern Baptist church camp on staff and as a contract worship leader. And there's an asceticism that takes place too, because these kids we were exhausted. You're with the recreation, and you're dehydrated. And I'm actually saying that's a pathway into the spiritual, because what the desert fathers, what is that?
Yeah.
What is fasting? And then there's this fraternal aspect of it as well, where you're just with your group and your team, and the 12, there's all sorts of things going on there. So I think it's not only the what I would consider what's that word? I'm going blank, but not manipulation, but your I can't think of the word. I think it starts with a C. Anyways, not coercion. Anyways, setting that,
I hear what you're saying.
Setting that mood, creates an opportunity related to all that whole spiritual thing to really, and it's age centered. There's all sorts of pieces to it. And one of the things, one of the guys talks a lot in this corner of the internet, Paul Vanderklay, he talks about the mega church movement, and how Willow Creek, they did a lot of the psychology that you were talking about. They studied people, and the methods within that movement is a very modern psychological way of doing ministry or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that is true. But I liked what you said about the postmodern part of ripping the soul apart, and I do think that Peterson played a role with kind of his psychological.
I was thinking that, like, it
union.
wasn't a distinctively maybe regenerate role. Like maybe he wasn't doing ministry, but he was he did some kind of secular thing. It was secular in the sense of not distinctively in the name of Jesus.
Right.
But he put man back together a little bit.
He put the soul back together a little bit.
Just say, well, God doesn't mean nothing. like maybe, I don't know.
No, that's a great point. God doesn't mean nothing, because that was the new atheist. That was the atheistic spirit of the age.
Man, I get so frustrated when people are like, Peterson, do you believe in God? I feel like people don't hear what he's trying to say when he answers. He's saying, what do you mean when you say believe? Like, he's saying, you want me to say what you're like. Now, what I think that Peterson is missing is confession. Like this idea of from the heart, out of the mouth. But the issue is that, like, as far as we know, he doesn't have the Holy Spirit dwelling inside of him. We don't obviously know that, but he's just hearing the question. He's saying, I don't. Do you want me to say? Because I know a lot of people that say that they believe and they live hypocritical lives. So what good does it do? And I guess he over privatizes it, because like if it's a matter between you and God, your heart, the state of your heart. Well, of course, like in that sense, like your confession, like is something before men, but it doesn't actually mean anything between you and God if it's not real. And I think that what he's doing is like over privatizing, because there is a sense in which he's right. I think it was Hudson Taylor who said, a man is what he is on his knees before God, that and nothing more. And I think that's what Peterson's trying to say is like, This is my business. You want me, but he's eliminating the act of confession and community. Like, well, yeah, the confession doesn't change your heart. It has to come from a changed heart, but that doesn't mean that you can't speak. And so I feel like I understand what he's trying to say, and maybe he doesn't have the theological vocabulary to scratch at it, but I hear what he's trying to say in answer to that question.
It's interesting that you say confession. I've talked a lot. That word is a layered word because, you have like confession to a priest, or you have confession. You're confessing the truth of something you've done or did, and not maybe to a priest, but to somebody else that you sinned against or something, or God. Yeah. And then you have like confessional faith, where you're confessing statements that you are submitting yourself to or belief. And, that I should be able to remember whatever Romans or John scripture it is, but confess with your heart that Jesus Christ is Lord. That is a part of what you're talking about related to Peterson. And I do think that he does take it seriously in the way that it's a serious thing, I think, to confess that and to know that as I'm saying this, what it's making me think is like that grace, his concept maybe of grace, if he has one, is like, well, if I confess that I'm a follower of Christ, basically, I think he believes he has to be perfect in a certain way, maybe. Like, it's too big of a confession.
Kind of, as we're talking about this, he's actually saying something kind of really Baptist about regenerate church membership, that like, well, if I say it, shouldn't I be living it?
Yeah. And
it's like, and I don't know that, I don't know. And I like how you're struggling with, is he talking about, well, not perfection, but living according to a standard?
Yeah. And he also would have to submit himself to the church in a way I don't know if he wants to. But I could be wrong. These are just things, and again, that's a whole nother conversation about authority too.
To me, it's like there's a sense in which Peterson's kind of a dream, because all kinds of unbelievers have meddled in the church, and Peterson's saying, I don't want to be a member of the church if I'm not really a Christian, or if I'm not, I don't know. Maybe I'm completely wrong. I know that his wife is going to a church,
Yeah.
and I'm sure that he visits, but
Yeah.
like, I wonder what Peterson would say if you were to say, to the Baptist church illustration, like, would you, okay, Peterson, you want to join this Baptist church? Well, do you believe in God? And he'd be like, do his thing, and then, okay,
I think maybe there's all this speculation that people have done. We probably should try to keep going. But the thing that was maybe he wants people to say, obviously he believes in God. Look at his life. I think that maybe that's what he wants and that should
it's not
be
working.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe. So we'll move on from old Jordan Peterson. I don't know. So let's go back to some of your story, getting kind of, so you talk about your childhood, your faith, you have this, what you would call a serious conversion around 16. You were raised in a type of authoritarian, controlling, spiritually, you use the word abusive to possibly, and then, what happens after high school or during high school, and like, cause you're what, 33? What did you say? Early 30s?
I actually don't know. I think I'm 32.
So early 30s now. So another whole lifetime from that moment.
Yeah.
What's been going on? What was going on there?
Long story short, by the way, I did my best, Mom. I did my best. I don't mean to use the word. I mean, that word's hotly debated, like the A word. And I also don't mean to throw any shade. I prefer to use the that strict, like, judgment. Felt like constant judgment. And could maybe some people would look at that and say he didn't have an abusive life, and I'd be like, okay, it's I really have moved on, but it is part of the story, so I don't mind using that word. But I do think so. There's this moment when I used to work on mowers, and I remember working on some engine and listening to a seminary lecture, and the professor said, if you are getting into the ministry to stroke your ego, you better run as fast as possible. And that scared me. I mean, that really scared me. And I think that's the best way to sum up. I was ordained. I joined the Baptist church, Southern Baptist church. I graduated from New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, went into ministry, and there were all kinds of other motivations, I'm sure, many of them good, I'm sure. But one of the motivations I had was to, I think, kind of gain some control, some more control again. And that became, I don't want to like over fancily say I was in ministry in part due to pride and kind of to stroke my ego. And I think when that professor said that, it hit me. And that wasn't why I got out of ministry. That's a whole story. But that kind of began a trajectory for me to where, at the time I was also lecturing through the Second London Confession of Faith. There was a sense in which
lecturing.
Yeah, lecturing. I was teaching in Sunday school.
Oh, okay.
In the church. And there was a sense in which when I finished teaching it and was making my way through seminary and some other things that happened in the church, that when I finished, I was like, okay, this is what I believe. I don't think I need to be in ministry anymore. It's almost like I used ministry as an opportunity to kind of explore something. I hate saying that, but I think I'm not the only one. I can't be.
Well, there's a difference between using ministry and going to seminary in a sense. And like that, if you say you used seminary to learn about theological education, there, I mean, that's not a bad place to do it. I guess the
Mm.
thing about seminary is specifically designed to, I guess, for ministry. I guess you could get a,
I'm saying I used ministry. I was in a church serving. I was an
okay.
associate pastor for 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I left that part out. I was an associate pastor at a church for 5 years, and near the end of me teaching through the Second London while in seminary, I was kind of like, I started to feel that I needed to be in ministry less and less. And I started to feel that, like, also I taught on Luther's calling, his doctrine of calling. So I was like, I don't need ministry to feel like I've pleased the Lord, I guess, if that makes sense. And so I'm not saying that the Lord will never have me in ministry or that I don't desire that to any degree, but it definitely became no longer an idol or less of an idol. Did I answer your question?
I don't know. I just was like, yeah, what happened in between? What happened? But high school. So you said you got ordained, you're associate pastor, you went to NOBTS. I went to a Southern Baptist undergrad, got a theological undergrad at
Where did you go?
A little college in Northeast Arkansas. People, there's only 2 in Arkansas, people, if they really want to know. But I was going to ask you, did you have Professor Putman while you were there? Do you know who that is?
Yeah. Ryan Putman.
Yeah.
They said he was the next Kevin Van Hooser, is what everybody was saying.
We were in the dormitory together at my undergrad.
That's amazing.
Buddies. I sat next to him in Hebrew. That's right.
That's awesome.
We have me and old Dr. Putman have some stories that we share together, some pretty wild ones from our undergrad days. So
things that only you two would know.
Well, I'll see if I've tossed around asking him to come on the podcast, and so that may happen, and we might like go down memory lane a little bit. But I was curious, you go in there. Yeah. So you go
marriage, kids, bought a house, went in a minute, we moved out here to be close to the church. And then the church dissolved.
Yeah, that's rough.
So yeah.
Were you the pastor of that church or the associate pastor?
I was the associate pastor.
Yeah. And so then you're teaching through the confessions. What did teaching through the confessions do? Like that did something, it sounds like, versus your seminary education. It seems like there's something there.
They were kind of supplemental. I mean, like Level was one of those places where, with all due respect, at the time, I'll even add that. I'm sure it's different now. But at the time, it was one of those schools that, like, if you wanted to phone it in, you could. I'm not even saying you graduate with great grades or anything, but like you could, go to school, and it was not just a piece of paper. It's not just a piece of paper, but there were some people that went and were kind of doing a little bit of box ticking and networking. I don't mean that in a bad sense. I'm just saying,
are you talking about at New Orleans?
Yeah, Level College, the undergrad.
Oh, the program, their undergrad program. Yeah. Okay.
And I would say, like, honestly, my criticism, I'm not even saying it's a bad institution or a bad education. I'm saying it's not a confessional education. It's not a distinctively like rigorous theological, committed to a certain theological system. The way I describe it was, and it's a lot of seminaries are like this. It's not New Orleans. Tons of decent seminaries. They should be called 5 View Seminary or 5 Views Baptist Church. Here's a book on the eschaton, 5 Views of Eschatology. You pick one. And that was kind of that's helpful, I guess, maybe even for a BA. That's not that big of a deal, but I did notice that there were a lot of people who still left and didn't know what they believed on a number of topics. And what I had been blessed by is having some friendships and relationships with some Reformed people in Louisiana that were kind of, and some of them turned into like really very close personal mentorship relationships, and eventually got me down this road of getting more and more into confessionally Reformed theology. And one day I was like, I really love the Second London. Let me experiment with getting in front of the church and say, I'm not necessarily saying this is what I believe or that you have to believe this, but with the pastor's permission, let me say this is what they believed, and just kind of treat it almost like history / let's see if we can prove this from scripture. And I came out of that experience saying, I think I believe every single word in this thing.
Do you feel like, I mean, I could ask some, let's see, how do I want to frame this? Because there's a conversation that's been going on in like some of the corners of the internet I hang out in that really, when we talk about propositions, and they kind of get conflated, confessions get conflated to, I guess, proposition. And I don't even know what I think about that, but that, what I guess seems to be thought is that so much of Christianity was confessional until recently, but I would kind of push back on that, especially in the context of something like the term Big Eva, and even how like you talk about how the training, maybe most of all the big six of the Southern Baptist ones are similar to this, like you said, and there's others like Beeson, Gordon Conwell, I don't know, like similar things, but that there's in the mainstream of evangelicalism, there isn't really an idea of what, until maybe recently, and somebody like, I think Redeemed Zoomer is doing a big job of doing this, which I'd be interested in your opinion about that, is promoting confessionalism as something. I don't think that 2 or 3 generations of mainstream, probably since the 50s, has even really been a thing. Even in more conservative, like I mentioned, like Gordon Conwell, or like what Tim Keller was doing. And I would be interested in I know you have videos on all these things. I've seen them, or at least seen the thumbs for them. And it's like, but things like Acts 29, things like Gospel Coalition, like that age, I feel like we're kind of like turning a quarter from that age. And I would be interested in how you see all of that together. That's a lot of stuff, but.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that there was no, I get asked this from time to time because I spend so much time talking about the OPC and Westminster and Van Til. And that was one of the, to my knowledge, there's no cleaner, like, confessional story or story of confessionalism, defending confessional orthodoxy than the one at Westminster, Philly. And in the 1922, Westminster, Philadelphia was founded.
With Machen?
Do what?
With Machen?
Yeah. And when you graduate to this day, unless something's changed, because I almost went there, so I had to learn a lot about that. They talk about it a lot in their student, like their connections with the students. And I found out when you graduate, you get a button that says one of Machen's warriors. You're now one of Machen's warriors. And there's like this like staunch, like at times aggressive, and maybe in the classroom, maybe at times abusive, like, this is what we must stand for, the truth. That like energy that you see at Westminster today, like, goes all the way back to the founding in 1922. And that founding was in light of the Presbyterian controversy of the 1920s. And that narrative is one of the cleanest. You got Princeton, you got, Warfield and all the OGs over there. And then Van Til and the boys come over and start a new seminary, a new denomination, Machen. And and then you go and try to find a narrative in the SBC, and it's like, it's just not as clean. And I wonder, this is probably like the worst possible answer to your question, but I wonder if there's something there, like when you look and you see that, like, I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, with some of these hierarchical structures, like with a Presbyterian denomination, for example, it's like if it gets corrupt, what you see in that narrative is that essentially they have to I'm sure it was incredibly embarrassing for them that they have to leave and start like their own thing, because it had been corrupted. And then in less hierarchical structures like that, like in the SBC, it's more democratic and there's a lot of moving parts and there are a lot of figures. Like when we, in the 80s with Criswell and the SBC, fought for inerrancy and fought against the modernists. That story is a little bit more messy and takes a longer time to tell than to say, Machen and the boys stood up.
It's called the conservative resurgence, though. I mean, it has a story that was like Moeller went in and apparently he was like he was your age when he became the president of the Southern Baptist Convention.
Yeah.
And then he cleaned house.
Yeah, that's an easy story to tell for sure. I'm not saying there aren't but that's not, it's still, I don't know. Maybe I'm like, maybe I'm a closet OPC.
Well, I heard you say that that when you were on the road in a video, you were like, I know I can go to an OPC church and I can take my family. I know what I'm going to get. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's part of what we're talking about more than OPC, but it's like where, and you see it, people believe that about Catholicism, whether that's true or not. People believe that about Orthodoxy, probably a little more true. Protestantism, people maybe and we said we might be talking about, what was his name? Matthew, Barrett just left the SBC for Anglicanism. Mm-hmm. This idea, what we're really talking about is identity, which is a huge thing. And it's funny to be talking about it in response to the sexual revolution, I think, of the last. And when I say that, not necessarily like the feminist one, but like the same sex and all that stuff, like identity, the flag. Mm-hmm. And now Christians are starting to be like, we thought it was like, oh, we can just like whoever, in all things charity and all things this and all things that, it's like, it's hard to hold in some shallow vibes container and pass things on. Like, that's what because if you don't have a clear identity, then
go ahead.
No, you can respond to that.
I think you're right with this word identity. I think that's what we're getting at. The reason I went to that and talked about stories. I do think it's the cleanest story, but I think maybe what makes it so easy to tell. And Moeller's, I think you're probably onto something. I think that's probably a hard second, like him cleaning house. That's a great story that he comes to Southern.
It's not as Machen's got like the 12 fundamental or whatever the book is, the fundamentals. And that's part of the story. I think it was so nationally institutional because Presbyterianism was much more of a national story. Mm-hmm. Presidents, it was more of elite, I guess you could say. Princeton, and then this being like, I feel like the SBC was a little bit more niche, a little bit more less elite, but within it's been hugely influential, but it wasn't like American institutionally influential in the way until the 80s, until that time, until Billy Graham, and but it was a whole nother machine, and it wasn't based off of confession like we're talking about. It's based off of altar call, and big arenas and things like that.
What is it? What's I'm looking it up right now. There's the articles. There's articles that there's the abstract of principles. That's what it is. That was the thing. You talk about identity, confessional identity. One of the things that made Moeller so powerful was enforcing the I just forgot it. Abstract of principles to be actually the confessional standard at the seminary. And I think there's something in the name as part of that story is like the Westminster Confession, the Westminster Seminary. And I don't know that they've lost that energy since then. And I think I brought that up because now it's making more sense. In fact, because like Southern is such a cool story, and then Moeller's you got Eric Mason, and so what's that? And then getting back to what you mentioned, like TGC and all these things, and things are so big that it's like, it's not like, oh, this denomination became corrupt. This seminary became corrupt. We started our own seminary. We've been going strong ever since 1922. And it's like clean. It just flows off the tongue. But then you look at Big Eva and it's like, well, we cleaned up this institution here. And then, well, now we got people at our seminary who, even though in the abstract of principles, it teaches the Sabbath, but we now have professors that are teaching against the Sabbath in our institution. So we're like, I guess the SBC is like we've had a German Shepherd. He sheds a lot. And we're constantly having a sweep.
Well, and the whole thing, this to kind of hone in on the Matthew Barrett story about like what happened at the SBC convention last year related to the Nicene Creed, but even still, like this wrestling with history and historically, what does it mean to be a Christian? And I do think that like it's interesting that you chose to read the 1600 London Confessions, because that's like taking it back to, the Reformation and to something about a denominational identity founded there, not just an not just the associate, like if you're saying, there's so much going on here because you could say, oh, just jump ship everybody to the old churches. But that's not on a practical level. It's just not going to happen. It is going to continue to happen. There's going to be a lot of it. I watched a video today. Guy's got 33 subscribers. Why I'm probably not going to be a Protestant anymore, and he's basically leaving being a Southern Baptist-ish person. And the things going through my mind are also related to, we brought up the Gospel Coalition, Acts 29, Passion, Hillsong. There were these identities, but they were based off of off of influence more. And Piper and the Young Restless Reform came in, and and Keller, they kind of reined that in a little bit for people that were in a broader sense my age. I'm 40, people a little older than me. Okay, here's something a little bit more structured, a little bit more theological. But even that, Lifeway as a publishing house, like what influence do these things have with what does it mean to be gospel centered now? You can just stamp that on something. It's like these words, they aren't attached to anything concrete in a way. And I think that as the postmodernism continues to dissolve, like you said, the man and the institutions and the internet, the walls of all these churches, like I watched your video about this, and I wanted about this ecumenicism, what we're doing even right now. But that confessionalism should be more important related to this. I don't remember exactly how you put it.
No, it's the confession or confessionalism. Quick story. When I was just about to get into ministry, I'm sitting in a work truck, and I've got this paper, like stapled, this paper booklet of the confession. Reading it, coffee stains on it, but looking at the scripture references and seeing like a word or a phrase, and that phrase doesn't appear in scripture, but they're putting it in a book and saying this is what the Bible teaches, and then looking it up, and then looking up like some of the most, like at the time, that's a random verse to cite to prove this doctrine. Like, why are they? And then just spending time and noticing like some of these doctrines came about from meditating on scripture and pulling scripture together. And so you're not just saying what the text says, which is a big conservative evangelical statement in seminary about how, to preach, just say what the text says. But you also have to
a plain reading.
Yeah. But you also have to say what it means. And so, you're a Presbyterian, so you should be down with this. But like, if you go look in the Garden of Eden and you don't see the term covenant of works in there, but that's like an old term that we said, yeah, but that's what this passage teaches. It's what it means, because when you take all of scripture together to bear on any given passage of scripture, then You know, and I would ask questions like this in seminary. I'd be like, wait, when we come back to preach the next Sunday, do we have to like assume that God isn't triune? Like, how much theological reinvention do we do every time we come to preach a text? Or are we do we come to the text with assumptions, like theological assumptions, because we believe something when we go to interpret a passage? I already believe in the Trinity when I'm preaching Exodus 16, the Trinity. I believe in it while I'm studying it. Do I need that passage to prove every doctrine to me or reinvent the wheel? And I think there was this sense of, it's like a settledness, if that makes sense. It's like and you talk about meaning, like, well, how many people are in a culture that this message is everything is meaningless, nothing matters, like your life doesn't matter, and everything is meaningless. And then you have pastors preaching sermons and they aren't saying the meaning of the text. And I think that there's like an assumption in confessional churches, and I think Baptists are going to have to let me ramble a little bit longer.
Keep going.
Think Baptists are actually, you talk about the disappearance of Barrett from the SBC. So totally open to being wrong about this. I'm not going to say clip me. But I think that we might see the disappearance of the SBC because of this lack of being connected to a system of theology, but rather being connected to a system of, I'm sorry, a deep SBC or a
tradition. The word is tradition, actually.
Okay.
I think because it's like I mean, that's hard to say because that's the whole thing, right? You know, I'll tell you a story about this because I was the worship. I am the worship leader guy. You're the preacher guy. I'm the worship leader guy. That's the conversation we're having. And I did want to bring up your tweet from yesterday that said something I have it written down. Simple worship is greater than liturgical worship. We can get there later. Yeah. But to that point, because I think this is in there. When I was 16 and I go into First Baptist Church where I live and where did all my youth group and got licensed to be a minister and all that stuff. I'm doing the modern worship stuff. This was like 2001. And in Arkansas, stuff's still brand new for traditional churches, you know. And I get up on a Sunday night worship service and me and some buddies lead like 2 or 3 songs, and a deacon's face just turns red and he just gets up and he storms out. And for many years, I just was like, why could he not see that? Isn't it good that these young people are excited about something? But what I can see now from his perspective is that I was basically trampling on like 60 years of meaning in his life, tradition. But the SBC does not have a theology that wrestles with that very well. And that's one reason why, without having a book of worship, a book of, and again, like some of the other denominations, Anglicans have modern churches and Presbyterians have modern churches and Catholics even have really modern. So it's not just an isolated thing, but I would say there isn't, but I don't think that you can make an argument technically from tradition of why it might have been, we could have been more careful with what we were doing as 16. And then, but also what was taking place culturally downstream from Billy Graham, but downstream from the Jesus movement with music in the church. And when we talk, it's actually kind of like the liturgy of the church, because there's this other piece about, well, as long as you all agree on the right ideas, then we should be okay. But the form in which those ideas actually take place and manifest are, well, that's the liturgy and that's a tradition, whether that's high or low, we're still talking about it. And it's the compression in a way of our theologies and of our doctrine. And until I think the Baptists deal with that, if they do, I would tend to agree with you in a certain way, but it's not just Baptist. That's a wide thing.
So when you say tradition, I feel like you're using the. I'm trying to understand, make sure I understand how you're saying tradition. Are you saying like, you're not necessarily saying, traditional, like the Anglican Church?
Yeah.
It's like this is traditionally, like Barrett's article is like, this is how it's been done for this long, and which is so interesting because, by the way, like Anglicanism is almost as old as the Baptist faith. Like they're very similar in age, but depending on how you look at it,
I would say so. On that again, tradition. What I'm trying to say is, as I experienced the quote unquote worship wars in the heat of it with modern worship and hymns and the Baptist liturgy, which was my formation. All of that was like my formation in ministry and my formation in my life. Because there was a church that got started in my town, and when I was 16, I was one of the only people in our town doing that stuff, and they asked me to come work for them, a non-denom, when I was 16, 2001 or 2. And I did. And so I would like go there on every other Sunday. And then I go to like First Baptist on the other Sunday with my family. And so what I'm saying about tradition is like, I think like
I hear you saying
like Lutherans would have a much stronger related to their liturgy, related to like, hey, we're not going to do this because this is not in our tradition or something like that, maybe. And I don't know how you do that as a Baptist. And what's funny is I think if you decided you wanted to be more traditional now, people might be butthurt about having a more traditional service. Like, this doesn't have the right vibe, but they actually can't argue against it because tradition doesn't have that kind of authority.
So I've been a part of some church. I hear what you're saying. I've been a part of some churches that, like off and on through my life, that have tossed out, for example, Sunday school.
Yeah.
And the argument is really funny. Well, they did Sunday school out of tradition, just because. So that means that we don't have to do it. And so we're not going to do it. Why? Just because. So like if you're doing it in rote or rote,
yeah,
you're just doing it just because, well, then you can quit it and replace it with something else just because. And you actually need a biblical and theological reason, and I think you can prove it from scripture, why we have Sunday school.
Yeah. So
like
catechism.
Tough.
Yeah.
And I think I heard you say that like Baptists aren't able to defend it. So like the deacon that gets upset, unless I misheard you, he's upset because like this is not how we done it.
Mm-hmm.
And you just, I love how you said that. You just disrupted like 30 years of my meaning. But he doesn't have like, what can you prove from the scriptures? And here's the problem. He wasn't catechized properly to know, well, why is it a big deal if you use this kind of music or that kind of music? Do you have a good reason? And the reason has been, well, this is the way that we've always done it. And it's not that he doesn't have any connection to history. He remembers the last pastor or two. Right. But I just got done finishing a documentary for a church. And one of the ladies asks the pastor at one point for why all the people that he's invited to the church, are not any of the previous pastors from this church. She said, are none of the previous pastors from this church qualified by your standards to preach at this conference? He goes, yes, ma'am, but they're all dead. We've lost our way. And anyway, like, I wonder if, take the term associate pastor, for example. I actually myself decided to sit down and think about, why am I called to this? Can I find some biblical justification for it? You actually can in 1 Timothy 5, but I had to do some thinking about it.
Yeah.
Like, why would I take this title? And does that kind of scratch at what you're saying? Like, just because?
Yeah, vibes, right?
Vibes.
And And I think that's what maybe youngish millennials and younger are so inundated with vibes that they're looking for, like, almost, and this is where I would bring in the meta, you were interested in the meta modern thing, is almost like they all are great postmoderns. They all know that, oh, Gilgamesh and Noah, who's to say? They all know, like, well, you were born in Texas and they're born in India, so they're a Hindu and I'm a Christian. Yeah. Okay, fine. They're all great postmodern pluralists. The meta thing for me, and I had a conversation with someone that really had spent a lot of time writing about metamodernism, called, his name's Brendan Graham Dempsey. And one of the things in our conversation that came to was, so say it that, I'm probably a pretty good postmodern myself related to all of that too. I can lay out those simple arguments that are used to deconstruct people's faith. My question is there an can you then take a ruler or an objective measure and say, well, maybe, even though that's true about the person raised in India, that person raised in Texas, maybe that's true about Gilgamesh and Noah, maybe they are the same myth, whatever, the same story, the same thing that really happened. But the question is, do these things do different things? Can you, like, beyond the fact that maybe there's 2 or 3 or 50 things that we would say, oh, well, that's just what postmodern has flattened. Can we then go beyond that and be like, well, actually, I hold this one up as having more value than that one. And it has more value for a lot of other reasons. And so there's that level. And then there's the point of which a Christian would say is then either leap of faith, either a personal experience, like a spiritual experience that ties them and grounds them to their faith related to conversion or something. But I would say that, so there's a lot of, so bring it then into the denominational grid of all these, Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant, Big Eva, Charismatic, Baptist. And it's like, okay, well, I think I can, well, if there's, if this is true, why are there so many different blah, blah? Okay, well, okay. We can still say that, but can I say that objectively, maybe this one, for whatever reasons, and they can be spiritual, they can be your own study, these things, I can objectively, or I'm going to choose to objectively put this higher on my hierarchy of value and participate in this and believe it and choose to believe it in that way. And I think that in some ways that's where we're at, and some of the why confessionalism is going to rear its head again, because we actually, people with AI, it's a quick thing. Can you compare and contrast these things for me?
Yeah.
And then you have to look at where you live in the world, in physical space, and look out and be like, what makes sense? Is it just, I agree with all these propositions of the Orthodox Church, so I need to go be Orthodox, even though there's not one within 3 hours from me? Is that the right move? They might tell you it is, but maybe it's, I don't know. I would, and then this seems more Orthodox in a sense to do life like this within my faith and the community and life and these patterns that they lay out cosmically and different things. So I don't know if any of that's landing for you, but
yeah, what I love about, let me know cut me off if it is not tying into what you said, but I feel like confessionalism is like, a friend of mine used this recently. He used the term, like, confessionalism allows you to, it gives you like the theological vocabulary to kind of like front load a term with a ton of meaning, so that you can like say that the word to someone else across the denominational aisle, so that you can have a conversation better. And one of the things that Big Eva lacks is like a self-awareness about that fact, that I was pretty hesitant maybe about 6 months ago to say this, but I'm getting more and more comfortable, I think, to say, I don't think that anyone on the planet has identical theology. That might seem silly to say. I really want to give that some thought, but it's an interesting question. Like, when you're dealing with, even just like the medieval period, for example, like were their views monolithic? Looking back on it, it's like, well, there's a sense in which it feels like they were, but is humanity that much different as the structures have changed? Now there's all these different denominations, but I think that people are now just like expressing, like, people are just different, and the structures kind of like, and they think differently, but the structures give like pressure and different incentives to say that you think something if you really don't, because that's just what, take Anglicanism, for example, in the 17th century when things were shifting. You had some folks like the particular Baptists, were some of them, that it wasn't that they were always being persecuted in the same way, but you could go to school and get a better education if you were part of the state church, and so they were just like, there was pressure to play along a certain way. And anyway, I think we just lack like some self-awareness about that fact of, the necessity to recognize how we're actually different and we actually think differently. And what confessions do, I think, is when I'm grounded in one, I don't know why. I think I've been thinking about this a lot lately. Why do I have, a dozen or two Lutherans and Presbyterians that watch my stuff, like, at least, and they comment and they say thank you. A couple of people were so excited to get State Baptist. They're Lutherans. They're excited to get State Baptist, my friends, t-shirts. And I'm like, why? But I think it's because
it's a respect for the confessionality that you're expressing.
Yeah, I think it's a respect for theological distinctiveness. And on the issue, you brought up ecumenism. I think this is actually a better way. You could look in the 20th century modernist, fundamentalist, and Presbyterian controversy debates and those issues, and see that I'm kind of foggy on with a new and old school Presbyterians, and there was the
new light, old light, yeah.
But it kind of boiled down to, if memory serves, it boiled down to, you had people that were more committed to the confession, and then there were people that committed to ecumenism.
And also, I don't know if ecumenism is the exact phrase. I think part of it, if I recall, is also kind of the Wesleyan, the Great Awake, the personal experience, conversion experience thing, was also being contended with within those distinctions, because it would, and those are subjective things to a degree, not maybe for a person, but they're subjective, like you were saying, to everybody having their own theology or something, versus, well, my identity is Presbyterian, and that is just what I am. My identity is Lutheran. That's just and that's my life, and that's my religious practice and my faith practice, and it's, when you come, like you or I, from that very kind of more subjective framework, when you encounter something more objective, like the 1680 church, or church parts of church history, or even an institute, like thinking about things institutionally, this is what I started watching Redeemed Zoomer like 2.5 years ago. I called him up. We had like a conversation, just like a short, brief one, because he radically opened my eyes to the word, like, Christian institution, in a way that I had not been able. It had not been in a framework for me. And I think, like, coming up from, if you're Baptist, and this is part of the tension that you talk about, even with like associationalism and the polity of the local church and all that kind of stuff. Your identity is where you're at. And however, like, when I look at, like, my mom's dad was an associational Baptist ministry, and then a minister, and then he went and worked for the Baptist Sunday School Board, and then worked for Lifeway in this later part of his life. And he was an associate pastor at First Baptist Nashville. And then that and the way that the association worked in our town. We got a bunch, we're in the South in Arkansas. There's tons of Baptist churches everywhere, Southern Baptist churches.
Right.
And I was a recipient of the power of the Southern Baptist Institution. Sunday school, RAs, associational church camp, state church camp, through the college systems, the university systems.
Can I stop you right there?
Well,
I think I know what I was trying to say earlier.
Okay.
The systems. You have like systems, not traditions.
Kind of, yeah.
It's like this. You talk to this guy and you get this guy and this network and this director and this, and it's like, give me a pope.
Yeah. So okay. Well, I think that it used to function more. And I'll throw this thesis into it, but I think the church growth, church planting program usurped the Baptist institution, the Southern Baptist institution, because it completely broke down associationalism. And it replaced it with entrepreneurial startups that actually killed all the associations. And drew all of the small church people to the bigger structures through using principles of startup culture.
And now I'm interviewing you now.
Well, I watched it happen. I watched it happen where I live. I can tell you the story.
That's wow.
It happened. So, I mean, and I got this family lineage part of it too. But in 2003, probably, I was a senior in high school. And again, I'm like in this town of 10,000, strong associate. I went to association church camp. We had great experiences. I'd go to a Friday night youth associational rally. It's where I felt called to ministry at one of those things. And my friend, I'd be like, okay, it's kind of boring, but I might see 2 or 3 of my friends that I met at church camp that summer, at this thing. And that's kind of cool. All the youth pastors were going to the college I ended up going to, and they would drive an hour and a half to do part-time youth ministry at all these little churches in the association. Right.
Yeah.
And so I go to this meeting at our associational camp, and I think they asked me to come out there and play a song or two, like, the young new guy in town that does this thing. And I remember watching one of the guys from probably what would be the 3rd or 4th biggest Baptist church in our town. And they were excited to announce that they were going to sponsor the new mission in the town that I grew up in, which was a town of 300 people. It was going to be the new Baptist mission, 2003. That church doesn't exist anymore. Not the one that he did. The one he did, but the one they sponsored, it didn't last. Because around that time, where I was going to church, First Baptist, there was the whole movement, modern worship. There was a college service. And that college service ended up turning into one of these church startups, right? And they were using all of the slick methods and so here's the funny thing. I had a band. We traveled.
It's kind of businessy, right?
Oh, 100%. I mean, yeah, in North American Mission Board.
Putting like meat on the bones of the, the SBC is so businessy, but you're really fleshing out like the system-y, businessy, networky.
Yeah, well, and it's because these things were successful. You look at Bill Hybels, you look at Saddleback, you look at New Spring, you look at Elevation, you look at what's Harvest. Like they were all running the CEO entrepreneurial model, and it was working. And so, and I was,
and on that note, what works? Me and a friend have talked about this before.
Yeah, that word is a bad word, but yes.
But like when you're thinking about like theology, polity, missions, evangelism, church planting, that falls under some of those categories. I feel like for a long time, we have formulated our theology in this context with this question in mind: what works?
Telos, the telos of evangelion, the word. What is that word? The good news is to reach. It's not formation. It's not. It's just Billy Graham. It's just how many baptisms, how many, that metric of, well, we've done the right work because we have these numbers that prove church attendance, that became to be what works.
And when it's way more complicated than that, because you need to think about what works and what's true, what is true, not just what works.
I'm not saying those are good metrics myself, but I'm giving.
Oh,
them,
no.
Yeah.
Oh, 100%. I understand what you're saying. And I'm saying it's complicated because like what works is important, but it can't be just that, which I think is what we've been feeling in the SBC, is like, it just feels like it's what works. It's the pragmatism issue, right?
Yes,
and then
it is
you have what's true, and then you also have, and what do you believe, which is the confession part.
Well, and do we even get to that point as long as that's, and I think even that's the question. So, and it's so instant gratification, and it's it's so mechanical, like if you just look at like the camera room for Prestonwood Baptist Church on any given Sunday, and they're saying, go here, go camera 4, go camera this. There's this huge, it looks like my studio here. It's a production studio more than it is a church. And that's what I'm saying. What makes a church? Does a website make a church? Does your social media presence make a church? Yeah. I thought it was like the confessions and the sacraments as a Presbyterian, that and formation and there's other things I would go into without that as my apologetic for something like sacramental ontology. But beside that, because this isn't just within the SBC, but I would say it's probably the most endemic. And it has undermined itself, because when these churches become their own institutions, they're like, why do I even need the SBC? Why do I even need it?
So there's like all the cooperation, and there's money, and it's
but
like,
who cares? Who cares?
Like that has been like a kind of a mind blowing thing.
But who cares? Because we're doing so well.
Yeah.
That I don't. And like the idea of like, why give money to international missions? Why give money to North American missions when we could just keep building here? Yeah. Because you don't believe in the association. Like why would the dude from Saddleback show up to an associational Baptist meeting and talk to the other Baptist ministers of churches of 200 or 100? Like, why would I even do that? I need to talk to my staff. Yeah. And so it completely undermined the church growth startup culture machine, completely undermined the relational aspects of associationalism. And like I think there was a revival, a real revival that took place in my community. And I think it was because of that whole relational associational system was working the way it was intended to. And right. And so like there were like Bible studies with kids. They were just doing them. And there was like the kid from this little Baptist church and one of the 2 kids from this little Baptist church, but there were like 5 or 6 from First Baptist. And there were like, 4 or 5 from the big Baptist churches. But like, and then they all went back to their churches and their homes. But those relationships were started at the associational camp. And there was like a lot of spiritual momentum. I'm just saying, and all of that was, so I'm in Sunday school in 9th grade, and they're like, hey, there's like an announcement sheet. And it's like, there's going to be an associational this on the 7th, at Friday night, whatever. And when the church now, like if you have like in a town of 10,000 that I live in, and you have a church that's pushing, probably on certain good Easters, they were pushing 1,000 people. It was like, why do I need the association? But they sure do make the association look good on paper. So then the associational missionary is probably like, no, we got to have this, like, I don't know. That's just what I'm saying.
I don't know if this maps onto what you're saying, but multiple times as you were talking, I wondered if this is a problem way under the hood. But like just thinking of the guy standing in the pulpit preaching, and he's seeing the people come to the door. Where does he put the theological bar of the church? Does he put it all the way down at the lowest common denominator theologically, the person that walked in the door and knows the least about God? And I feel like that's
also part of it.
Yeah. Where do we, how we do theology, how we confess, how we preach, how we sing needs to be based on that lowest common denominator and what they understand, and not raising the bar.
That's the Brandon Lake viral thing about Bubba in the back seat.
I saw something about that. What did he say?
He says we don't need to be singing songs like "Holy, Holy, Holy." We need songs that Bubba can, get on with, like my songs.
It's the opposite of what needs to happen.
Well, he's got a lot of influence. So, I mean, think about that. Like, that's, I mean, and that'll preach too. Because, man, we want Bubba to come to church at the expense, again, of like all this breakdown that I think that we're talking. I mean, that's just one part of it.
And then in the businessy side of it, though, is this like
hostile takeovers?
What you mean?
Like what David Platt was doing down in and there's this story about Second Baptist Houston, and there's stuff like that. Anyways, go ahead.
Well, yeah, and I would like to imagine what would it. I hate doing this. It feels like motive reading. I'm thinking of my own personal experiences talking with pastors, but I wonder what backroom conversations look like with him as well. But dinners, lunches I've had with pastors, and it's like if I say, I've been thinking lately about the filioque and why it's so important, and I've been thinking about what we lose in our theological traditions when we lose John 3:16's only begotten. So it needs to be begotten. So is the essence of the Father communicated from Father to Son? And so I want to get into some theological nitty gritty.
Homoousia versus homoousias.
Yeah. And if I say that, there have been dozens of times where a pastor will look at me and go, well, but you got to think
practically.
How will it preach? Most people in your church, you think they're thinking about subsistencies? What the word you said? Subsist what? And it's like, they're like you have this lens, you have these lenses on, and it's called like my ministry, and they're formulated, and not to knock them in either. This is how the seminaries have trained them, where they've been trained to think, well, what's going to get baptisms and growth and numbers? And so when you bring up a doctrine like simplicity, well, that doesn't sound like a numbers doctrine. And they wouldn't say that, but it's like this weird like thing that's going on in their brain where they're hearing doctrine, but they're hearing it through the lens of
there's plenty of people that would say that explicitly. I went to an Acts 29 conference back in 2012, and there was a pastors and executive pastors meeting that was happening in the main session. This was at sadly at he took his life there in Patrick's church. I don't know if you remember him.
His name sounds familiar. We're going.
He in St. Louis. So we went. So the pastors and the executive pastors went to, and it was like the guy leading it was from Seacoast Church, which is a big church on the East Coast. Mm-hmm. And then like they were like, worship leaders, y'all go downstairs to the basement with Charlie Hall. And I was like, okay, that's fine. I think Charlie's cool. So went down there, but came back, and my pastor was so dejected. He was so dejected because basically what they told them, and again, like, Acts 29, theological, right? Reformed. Right. They told them that every minister has a number. Like basically everyone has a charisma number. And if your guy can't get that number, like if you're youth guy.
I wonder if that's where the Matt Chandler 8 and 7 came from. Remember that? He's talking about the black 8 or the black 7, the white 8.
Like people's ability to like grow a church. Is that basically what it is?
He was talking about, he said, I'm not trying to do the, what's whatever, the tokenism or whatever. But if I have a white 9 and have a black 8, and he's talking about the number, and he said, give me the black 8.
Like as in DEI in a sense?
Yeah, diversity thing. But anyway, you said the number, but.
Well, the number thing at this point, this is before all that kind of came into the zeitgeist, from post 2016 or whatever. But like what I'm talking about is they basically were saying like, if your youth guy, like if his number is 100, like that's what he can do. So you want to go probably like get rid of him and go get a guy that's got a 5 that can do 500. And that was basically what they were saying. And I watched it happen to a buddy of mine. He was fired from a church outside of Nashville because I think he was a 200 guy and I think they wanted a 500 guy. They were running like 200, and he got fired and put under an NDA for it. And I know I know who the pastor is, and he's at a big church down in Southern Texas, and he's pretty popular on Instagram Reels. And so, like, I've seen the dirty side of this stuff, like, under the guise of we're theological, and it's like total pragmatism. And so, I think that part of,
this is a really dark thought, but I've kind of thought before. I wonder if, whether unknowingly or not, a lot of people with Acts 29, TGC, all the good that it did, but in the midst of that, how many people pretended to love theology? Because that was becoming cool.
Dude,
and
I got more stories. You want another story?
Go ahead.
I went to a conference called Doxology and Theology in 2013, and at Southern. Okay. And there was a guy who was one.
I remember that conference. I never been, but I remember that.
Yeah. So, and there was a guy who I'd met at the previous year, and I used to do some itinerant worship leading, and I followed him to a few events. So he would like do one, I did one the next year, whatever. And like, he didn't have a car. I guess he had flown in, and I had a car, and he like kind of like smooshed up to me to want to go basically so he could go network with other worship leaders. But he was like, I could just tell later that he just wanted to hang out with me because I had a car. And that was just so like, it felt gross. And like, and this is the whole thing about with my podcast, even these things affect me to this day. So like, I talk to a lot of people that don't have a platform at all. Like you're one of the bigger people with a platform that I talk to. Because there's just like, I've experienced that whole game and I know what it's about. And I tried to build a ministry on it. And like, I failed bad. I think we talked about that on the phone. And, so like, all this stuff we're talking about, like all of that stuff just is like, I could live without the church growth machine. Like I could live without the thing. Now, is it good to have a website where people can find your building? Yeah. Like, is it okay to be posting something on social media? Because like, yeah, people are there. But if you think that's what your church is, like, I think that's a big problem.
Yeah.
And related to so much of this.
And I do think that the framing of ecumenism and confessionalism is helpful, because in a lot of these like movements and circles, there is a lot of talk about like, like you said, the telos reaching and stuff like that, and making it, I don't know if appealing is the right word, but trying to like,
I will do anything short of sin. I will do anything short of sin.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's actually funny. The very first video I ever put on my channel was a complete experiment. And I really did it. Getting back to my story, I actually was trying to answer some questions for myself. And so, I'm in seminary, I'm teaching through the confession, and I was like, I got a camera and turned it on, and I just hit record. But I actually spent 2 weeks studying the 20th century fundamentalism and modernism, maybe a month, and essentially wrote like a long paper and just recorded it. And I think the video is an hour and almost 2 hours long. And I started that video to disprove confessionalism, because I had kind of been in for 4 or 5 years. I had been wrapping up my mentorship, and the Reformed Baptists started to feel kind of stuffy to me at the time. And I came across this quote by Richard Mouw. Well, it was a lecture, and he had framed Abraham Kuyper and compared him, I think, with Warfield, but it could have been someone else. But that Kuyper, he said, was creative. He was interested in creative theology. And this other figure, I don't know if it was Warfield, but Hodge.
That's
I think
him.
it was A.A. Hodge.
Yeah.
And he was into confessional theology. So he framed it as creative or confessional. And he showed all due respect.
There's another one. Do you know what the other one is?
What is it?
Incarnational, but keep going.
Is that you?
Yeah.
Okay. I'd love to hear more about that
keep
in
going.
the next episode. So anyway, I went in basically like thinking I'm leaning toward Kuyper and theology needing to be creative, meaning like
Culture.
find creative ways in each generation, in each new context, to be able to communicate the gospel in a way that makes sense to the people. And then Hodge was more like confessional, that Westminster story, like we're going to come down hard on the distinctives. And it was when studying like Machen through D.G. Hart and some figures like that I came away realizing that, I think it was a quote from Roger E. Olson. He's a Wesleyan Arminian. I think he wrote a book against Calvinism or something. But his and others, their formulation of like community, what is a community? And it sounded like it came down to, for people who are more the creative theology approach, that we need community based on community. We need a community just based on the idea of love and each other, and we're here together. Whereas the confessional theology is like, we actually need to be here on the basis of truth and what we believe together, that we are a community based on something and that it means something. And I started noticing, getting back to what I was saying earlier about the Lutherans, like the Lutherans going to listen to my stuff. Well, I talk about the law and the gospel, and they have that in their system, but they don't have my covenant theology. But it's okay. They can look at the part of my system, covenant theology stuff, and say, I'm not really sure about all that. But when he talks about the law and the gospel, I can, and that's what I'm talking about, is the confessions giving us the theological vocabulary to talk to each other, ironically enough, can result in a more powerful ecumenism than pursuing ecumenism or reach or evangelistic endeavors or those kinds of things, and setting the theological distinctives aside. Now, actually, when we bring them in, then we can better talk with each other and know where we stand, where we don't stand together. And Herman Bavinck talked about at the, like, you search through the annals of history, and you see all this division and all this like spiritual and it's backbiting and schism, people breaking off from each other over every little thing. And I'm completely botching the quote. I read the quote at the end of the video, but there's basically like the spiritual unity that we're pursuing, we actually already have, which is a crazy thought. That we actually, if we really believe this stuff, we actually already have it in Christ. So then when we're talking about polity, we're talking about the best way to order ourselves in our own local communities, and then denominationally, associationally, and then like amongst each other, like denominations talking to each other and different faiths talking to each other. And he said that there's nothing that we can do actually to harm this spiritual unity that we already have. It's so profound and transcendent. And I think the confessions, like, I'm interested in confessions serve purposes in a local church. They hold pastors accountable. They protect pastors from people from pastors, and people from each other. And and constitutions and all these, they serve so many purposes, but they also do serve, when you're talking about in a society, when different faiths coexist among each other, they also serve this purpose of like charity and allowing that spiritual communion that already does exist to, I guess, like be channeled
to respect to respect the why, I guess. If you understand, like, if you can better understand, it's like steel manning, like if you can better understand this, someone you might call not your enemy, but like somebody like John Vervaeke would, or Socrates, or somebody be like your interlocutor. Like, it's intentional relationship related to understanding your differences, but understanding why you may be able to grow from understanding those differences and respect them, why those conclusions came. Are you good on time? We got a little bit of time for you.
Dude, I want to go to 2 hours if you want to.
Let's push.
I'm so into pushing. I'll let you know if I'm having any trouble, but right now I'm at 11% on my Mac.
Do we need a pause to get the power charger?
Well, let's just keep going. I'll let you know.
All right. So I'll bring back in this guy because he doesn't even like me because I'm not PCUSA Presbyterian, but he's letting me know this. But Old Redeemed Zoomer is doing that. Like that was his major project, was actually like he identifies these kind of mimetic confessions within the churches, and he put them out there for people in a very compact kind of way, in a very digestible kind of way.
I hate to say it, but I agree with you. I don't like everything that he does and everything that he says, but he is doing that.
He is doing that. Yeah. And to me, that's he says some, dust up on Twitter, blah, blah, blah. He's 22 years old. Aaron Wrenn said this about him. Do you know who he is, Aaron Wrenn? He said, he tweeted, he said, he's the only person in Gen Z and all this world. I don't know. It was when he was getting a lot of hate, and I don't remember which one. It was probably 3 weeks ago. What he had said, what little thing, dust up patristics and blah, blah, blah. He's the only one given like Silicon Valley energy. And I've been saying this, is that he's the only one. Like, I believe that 22-year-olds can change the world because I have a Facebook account. Mm-hmm. I believe that they can. I'm sorry that I have a Facebook or an Instagram that basically was started by a 22-year-old in college, and he used digital networking, and he's really good at Discord, and he's really good at the stuff. And people every day are like, hey, I had a person show up to my church, Lutheran, Presbyterian, a lot of because of you, to him. Like, so say whatever you want. And I think he's onto that, and he's dialed in on, and even though he would critique me as not being a part of the PCUSA, I still think that he's doing something incredibly effective, at least within the main corpus of what he started with, the mimetic power that went forth from some of his videos that have hundreds of millions or at least tens of millions of views.
Well, he also we've tried. There we go. I was waiting for it to connect. It's charging now. We've tried to do movements and like institutional things or academic pushes, and there have been some really precious things. Like I think Founders Ministries. Are you familiar with them?
Mm-mm.
Get familiar.
Maybe.
Go look up
Founders. Yeah. I probably am, but it's probably following.
I'm Haskell. Anyway, there have been some
Center for Baptist Renewal.
That was one that came to mind as well. Center for Baptist Renewal. Matt Emerson, I think, is the guy over that. And like, I feel like I've kind of, I don't know if I've said this explicitly in a video or not, but there's like this idea of like, there's the Baptist faith. That's an interesting question too. Like, what's a Baptist? Like, is that the SBC or is it, the Baptist faith? It's like, it's easier, it's cleaner to like the Westminster, the Presbyterian, but like, because of like our autonomy, it makes it a little bit, but so it makes me want to say there's also a Baptist spirit, and there's and this is going on the Patreon, but I'll say it here that there's I just made a video, talked about, there's a Spurgeon quote, and I don't remember the exact quote, but he said that other denominations need to rely on the Holy Spirit less than Baptists. Because and I'm filling in the gaps of this, but like we don't believe that when we have babies that the church just grew. We believe that growth only comes from the power of Christ. And we try to structure our churches that way. So
that would be the difference between my incarnational theology, but go ahead.
Okay.
I am a Presbyterian, right?
Oh, of course. Yeah. No,
Go ahead.
And I love it because I really, I don't mean this as a jab. I mean, I sincerely believe like you would say the same, that the areas where, you appreciate me or feel or genuine and sincere Christianity is my own inconsistency. Like, oh, he's not, he kind of connects the dots weird over there. And I would say the same. I would say, like, in my opinion, that Presbyterianism, when brought to its absolute logical conclusion, you end up with federal vision and Doug Wilson's theology. And luckily, most Presbyterians don't do that. They're Orthodox Christians, and they're just a little bit inconsistent when it comes to, citizenship in Christ's kingdom and membership in the church, connecting those dots in a certain way. And what was the point I was trying to make?
Sorry, I
no, it's okay. Well, Spurgeon.
Yep.
Okay, so there's a Baptist spirit. Like, there is a way of like trust. So back to, like, we try to do things. We try to, like, well, let's create the Center for Baptist Renewal. I think it's great. It's great. Publishing houses, all that stuff is good. But, like, what I like about what I'm discovering about this little corner of the internet is that there might be some kind of associational, like, formality to it, maybe to a degree that I'm not aware of, but it feels more natural and more of like a movement. And I feel like those things, getting back to Redeemed Zoomer, I feel like he's tapping into like a cultural restlessness and an ethos and like, I guess, the memes of Christianity, and tapping into them, and not like, of course he had the what do you call it? The
Reconquista, and the Presbyterians for the Kingdom is the non-for-profit that's basically like a conservative group that promotes conservatism in the PCUSA.
But, like, why does that have energy though? It's because he's been bringing he's been spearheading a movement over to that. Because when you get on his YouTube channel, I stare at his thumbnails sometimes, and I'll see it has 2 million views, and I'm like, what does this guy just get? Like, he just understands how to.
He has a buddy of mine who's kind of deep internet. He said that he's following a format from another guy, which I can't quote. I'd have to, like, text you later. But the other part of it, like, he tapped into the format. But the other part of it is that he just is kind of like, I don't know if he's spectrum or not, but he kind of just doesn't give a damn. And I think that's part of it. Like, people are looking, and he's like, and what you're talking about being able to better communicate, like, because he has such a strong confessional foundation, he can better articulate the differences between him and a Lutheran, him and a Catholic, him and an Orthodox Christian. And he just is like, I'm okay with being Presbyterian, and that's attractive. It's because even though you disagree here, and here's why, I think people are looking, like, we go back into our conversation about, like, the lowest common denominator, or, in all things charity. Like, I think that worked up to a point because there was some level of social cohesion that at this point is basically gone. And now we need identity back, because we have to understand why we're doing what we're doing. And because of AI, and because of loneliness, and people need things to hold on. They need strong things to hold on to.
It's so interesting because we like, such a large percentage of our lives is on the internet now.
Oh yeah.
And, like, how do we, like, we're talking about recovering faith, recovering, like, theological identity, and then association within that tradition, and then traditions talking to each other. And then we're also talking about all of these things being put out on the cloud, and people talking to each other. And, you see, like, Joel Webbin wants to stiff arm Redeem Zoomer, and a lot of people want to. Sometimes I want to as well. Stuff he says about Baptists, I'm like, shut up. You know, like I
we
think
can talk about the worship stuff because that's where he's really harps. It's not so much the theological; it's about actually the form that it gives. But go ahead.
Yeah, I think he's so wrong about some things, but there's another sense in which, like we're yeah. I guess it's the idea of like gatekeeping, and we don't really have any gatekeepers because everybody is on the internet. But so everybody's trying to gatekeep, and like what they're really trying to do is really sincere. Even for Joe Webben, he's like, we're trying to say who's in and who's out, and we're like, hey, we're not with this, and it just like it's really messy.
Yeah, well, one of my early videos was like the digital is eating the walls of the church, eating the walls of the libraries. I mean, we're just all staring at each other now. We're just straight staring at each other, and the walls have been dissolved by the digital. And at the same time, it's like, well, we can look at the digital pieces and be like, well, this is what that is. But you don't have to go to a Catholic church or Orthodox church. You don't have to go to a modern church. You just like you can see it. Yeah. You can read about the theology. You can have somebody teach it to you on YouTube. Right. You can have it explained to you on AI. You can have it compared. Yeah. So the question now is, well, this is the meta. Like, well, now what? And can I objectively?
I was thinking that we could get to metamodernity.
Yeah.
Is that a phrase?
Yeah.
I was thinking we could get there. And I was wondering, I don't know if Redeem Zoomer is an example of this, but even talking about irony. And the reason I wanted to touch on it, I don't know if it relates to what we're talking about or not.
No, keep going.
But I feel like, what's so interesting to me is when you reached out to me, it had been that week that I had discovered like how relevant metamodernism was to what I was doing. And I didn't even know it. And you said to me, that actually makes what you're doing even more powerful, if I remember what you said, because you didn't even know. So there's this idea of like humor and irony, getting back to like the spirit of the Baptist, like this, we're moving and trying to move in a natural way. We're not trying to overly institutionalize anything. Excuse me, because that's kind of what the internet's. I'm Bob the Baptist. Sorry,
Bob the Baptist.
So, like, yeah, I guess I want you to lead that though, because like metamodernism is so interesting to me. But is there any correlation there about like the free spiritedness, I guess, of the internet? I don't really know.
Yeah, the post-ironic sincerity thing is, like if people will, hopefully some people that watch this will go watch your videos and you do this thing with your mic, you're kind of making fun of the man on the street mic and I don't know if you are or not. You say it's a thing. I'm trying to every video has, you're holding that little mic differently on a spatula, on a pair of glasses. Like,
Mike Winger does not like it. Did you see that? Did you see what he said?
No.
He said, "I'm so sick of this trend." I'm like, I didn't even know is it a trend? I don't.
Well, that's the thing. Like, yeah, it's like people on the street with this tiny microphone. It's just because it's what they have. It doesn't look like a news, and it's also because it's cheap. And like people holding an SM58 with a colored windscreen like the 1980s, it's not probably because they're trying to be ironically anything. It's like, well, it's cheap, and I found these at the store, and it's a good windscreen, and I like blue. But it does kind of look silly, and who cares? And yet, like,
that's interesting because Mike Winger would be a gatekeeper.
So he doesn't like, if you're going to be doing this, you need to be professional. Yeah. You need to have the SMB, the $400 SMB, if you're really going to do this, brother, because that's what Joe Rogan uses. But you're like, Joe Rogan's old, and and I even like, I'm 40. I was like, well, this is what everyone uses, and this blah blah blah, and it's like. It's also signaling
because I've had people say that like they've said that I'm Gen Z. I'm not.
Yeah.
But, well, that makes sense. They feel like I'm tapping into something.
Everybody leans one way or the other. You're going to lean younger or you're going to lean older, right? And so like what you're doing with the humor, what you're doing even with like the interlude graphics and the bold white text and stuff, with like the like the fuzzy trippy screen stuff, like is. That's very postmodern, but you're just like, let's not take this too I don't want to take this too seriously. I want this to be fun. And I'm talking about stuff that's really serious. And it's just whatever you've picked up, that style, like I think it represents something like that you're embodying something that people are looking at in a certain way. There's a guy named J-Reg. There's this other guy that young people have pointed me to, people in their mid-20s and stuff. And their stuff is intentionally not highly produced. They have millions they could probably, if they wanted to spend time being like, well, I'm going to produce, something good and with great equipment and whatnot. They could, but they kind of don't want to. And it's like, well, why wouldn't you want to do Chris Williamson if you could, or whatever? But, so I think all that's the meta, the beyond of what's total. Like the thing about Metamodern to me is about looking out across a landscape and realizing there's things postmodern that has, like, again, it's flattened. Well, like one theology and another theology, it doesn't matter because they're all just believe in God, or they're all just religions. And it's like, and we landed there, and then we have to like build what's beyond that. Like, is it just, you just stay in that state forever? I think something beyond that is you have to objectively then look at these things and measure them. And then they have to also deals with like meaning versus something more objective at the same time. Like, I'll use myself for like the Presbyterian thing. Like maybe there are other streams of Christian denomination that I might think I might fit better in it for me as an individual at this point in my life. But I've got a wife and kids, and I live in a place that I've chosen to live. The options are limited in a certain way because of other things. And it's like, well, we're going to stake here. And, I'm not the most theologically astute, doctrinally astute Presbyterian you'll ever talk to. Probably I probably know more about Baptist theology than I do.
You definitely have a lot of experiences.
Yeah. So again, like, well, would it make sense to be Baptist? Maybe it would in a certain way. But there's other parts of my life, like the fact that my wife was a cradle Catholic turned Lutheran, and her family is like very, like she has aunts and uncles that were nuns and archbishops and stuff like. And there's other things about theologically about the sacraments that I think I'm convinced about. So there's all sorts of reasons, like, and we have to like weigh all of this stuff. And at the end of the day, we have to just like, and I think the confessionalism piece is like, it helps you just be like, well, I just need to know so I can just keep going, and
not just, it's funny. It gets back to the Jordan Peterson thing. There's a sense in which like, I can't exhaustively ever know anything.
Yeah. The facts, there are limitless, almost an infinite number of facts.
Yeah. And when we talk about confession, especially Baptist conception of confession, is it starts in the heart, comes out of the mouth. It is not first and foremost a standard that I conform to, but comes out of me. But even having said that, the Baptists do have a sense of conforming to the standard because we still believe in confessional churches. So a church is either subscribing to a confession or not. And when is a church subscribing to a confession? It's when in its instituting documents, it says every pastor that serves here needs to hold to the confession. Now, they don't require, in Baptist churches, they don't require the members, and I'm told that this is true in some Presbyterian churches as well, to hold to that confession. But all the members of that church know that the teaching will be in line with this standard of this summary of the Bible. And so we do have an understanding of submission. The church member will submit to the church's discipline, and that includes not only a corrective discipline and like excommunication, but also the formative forms of discipline, which is like the written standards for the church. So they submit, they conform. So we do have in the Baptist faith an understanding of I have to conform, and there are times, there have been times, and now I do believe that the Pope is the Antichrist. But at the time when I was first coming across it, it's like there's almost like an anxiety, I feel like, that people have when doctrine comes up. Like you just think about most family, I don't know about your family dinners, sound like really exciting, but like most family dinners, it's like when faith or belief comes up, it's like a really anxious thing.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, well, if so-and-so is speaking and he's convictional, then like he expects me to have something to say or to agree or disagree. And then in our differences, he is judging me. And that's not, maybe that's true for some jerks that they're always judging, but that's not always the case. If I say, well, I think baptism is this, and you say, well, I think baptism is this, well, in our disagreement, I'm not judging you, and you're not judging me or like condemning. I'm just saying what I think. And I think that even when it comes to like, so there's like anxiety when I read in the confession, well, the Pope is that Antichrist. Well, I don't have to have a perfect answer for that right now. Like when I first read that and I read the responses and I would walk through it. I remember the day that I walked through it in Sunday school, and it was like an anxious discussion.
Yeah.
About what is that true? What if it's true? And there's a sense in which, again, now I do believe that more exhaustively, but at the time I was like, I'm really not sure. And that was part of my approach, was like, let me tell you what they thought. And then you can decide for you. That was one of Alistair Begg's great phrases he would repeat all the time. It's like, you're reasonable people. You can decide for yourself. And it's like, you give them here's the information, and then you can decide. And there can be a sense in which you read a statement and go, I'm not really sure about that, but I'm going to try to conform to it. And that's just that submission. And that's what Reformed Baptists ask of church members, is like, hey, just don't cause a fuss. Like, can we just not argue about the Sabbath in every single Sunday school? That would be great. Like, the pastors believe the fourth commandment is binding and that the Lord's Day is the Christian Sabbath. Don't raise hell about it every single Sunday. You can't go to church here. So there has to be a sense of, I don't have to know about that exactly and exhaustively right now.
And that's a great point. And as we're we're getting close to our time here, but the thing about that is, this goes back to the meaning related to, well, why would someone, if they disagreed with something, want to stay? Well, it's because the relationships in that place hold meaning. And so what do you do with that? Because that's very true and human. And I think that, and I don't know where else to go with that, but yeah, go ahead.
Interrupt you. There, a friend of mine, he's on the fence. I think he's considering staying Baptist, but
stay Baptist, my friends.
He was thinking about going Catholic, and I brought up some of the things, the bugaboos, like, well, what about this? What about this? And it was so interesting to me that he didn't necessarily deny or refute everything that I brought up. And he was willing to basically say, I'm willing to trade off the baggage in this tradition and take some of the baggage over here in this tradition, because this is more meaning for me. And people aren't ready for the amount of times they're going to be told, people leaving their churches as the SBC disappears, more churches close, more professors leave, that people are going to look at them and not give them perfect answers. Well, what do you do about Mary worship? You're going to hear more and more, I don't know.
Yep.
But I can't know everything. And what I get, like you're talking about the relationship and the connectedness to something. And I said this before, like, leaving evangelicalism, I'm not leaving anything because it's nothing, or people feel that way anyway. And yeah, I just wanted to interject there that I really think that there's going to be like a sense of trade-off where I'm just trading off one amount of baggage for what I perceive to be less baggage. And that's okay with me. I don't need to have all the answers. I need community. I need,
maybe you need reverence. Maybe you need something sacred. These things that are anemic in our society, and you're not going to get that as much in Big Eva, And so I think that's going to be contended with. And, they're great marketplace research. They're going to figure that out, and they're going to start being more reverent and more liturgical. And that's, again, another conversation because I do think that the forms of worship are part of, anyways. we can.
Well, that kind of, you're touching on that tweet, I think.
Yeah. And maybe that'll make sense in the future. But I think so much, again, like what we've talked about is we've said a lot of the same stuff, we've critiqued a lot of the same things, and we may end up in a little different places.
Well, even if you go the liturgical route, you see the problem that they're trying to answer.
Yeah.
And the Reformed need a more distinctively, distinctively theological and convictional approach to those very same problems. I think the answer is simple dimple worship as an answer to the problem. And others are going to say liturgy.
Well, sometimes that's actually the same thing. Some of that's the same thing. Yeah. And so,
but pretending like that's the issue is people pretending like the problem doesn't exist.
Oh, that it's not an issue with the form of worship.
Well, no, that the issue of meaning in religious communities isn't a problem. No,
it's a problem for everybody. That's the meaning crisis.
Yeah.
That's this little corner of the internet. Hi. That's, the Jordan Peterson, Jonathan Bijot, John Vervaeke, Paul Vanderklay world that is kind of, that's the thing is underneath a lot of this stuff. And so that's where a lot of people, go ahead.
I was talking to a minister recently about someone leaving the Baptist faith, and I basically said this, and I was like, we need better answers, and we need to be prepared. And whether the answer is, whether I'm framing it correctly or not, simple or liturgical, but the addressing the problem and having a good answer and good response and the willingness to sit and listen. And I was like, trying to sound alarm bells, and the response I got was, So anyway.
So you're on YouTube. YouTube. Well, dude, Bob the Baptist, Brave New Tube, thank you for coming on and having this conversation with me. Hopefully it'll make sense to do it again in the future.
Dude, can we do this again?
100%. 100%. And the other piece is just that the thing we talked about with confessionality, really, people bury it on their websites to pretend like it doesn't exist, sometimes. And I think that's part of it. So I just wanted to add that into one last thing, but thanks for coming on. And I think it will make sense. People, please go check out his channel at Brave New Tube. Follow him on X. He's got a lot of great videos that I think a lot of people, I know there's several people. I know a guy named Michael Sartori pointed Paul to some of your stuff. And so I know people are watching out there, but anyways,
we're gearing up for next week, or I don't know when does this come out?
It'll come out next week.
Okay. So whenever this comes out, maybe I have just launched, but Brave New Tube season 2 is what we're calling it. It's coming out. Patreon's coming out. We got tons of content on there. So I'm I'm just really grateful. I didn't get to really talk about that journey, but it was a wild journey, and we're so thrilled to be able to connect with this little corner of the internet.
Yeah, man. Well, you're already in it. So, all right, dude. We'll end this thing backstage.
MidWestUary 2025, August 22nd through the 24th in Elmhurst, Illinois. A weekend you won't want to miss, with special guests Cale Zeldin, Paul Vanderklay, Rod Dreher, Elizabeth Oldfield, John Vervaeke, and Jonathan Pajot. MidWestUary 2025, the Fellowship of the Spirit. Stay tuned for more details. Visit us at midwestuary.com for ongoing updates.
Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to yours truly, a place we go to think out loud.